Welcome to today's POMA Campfire session. I am Stephanie Spika Hickey, the Executive Director of POMA, and today we're talking with Dan Kahn, who's going to be our keynote speaker at the POMA Summit. Thanks for joining us, Dan. We're really excited to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to come to the summit and go to Minnesota and meet everybody and say hi. So should be a good time.
For those who don't know you, could you give us a little bit of your background? How did you get into marketing and what really pulled you into the outdoor space?
You bet, Stephanie. So, marketing and outdoors, I'll kind of separate the two stories for a second, even though they do converge. The outdoor thing is an easy one to answer. I grew up in a multi-generational outdoor rec family. My grandparents were, I think my grandma's title was, she wasn't like chairperson. She had like a cooler title than that. I think she was commandant. She was the commandant of this club that they had started in the 60s. That was like 20 or 30 families that all liked to fish. And so they would camp and they all had little boats and they'd go fishing together. My dad grew up that way. I grew up that way. My parents were in that club. So I spent most kind of away weekends all the years I was growing up with all these other families. And there was a group of us kids that would just like, we were feral. These were all trips that were generally almost always on public land. And again, that was in the 80s. So we would just get to these campgrounds and they would just sort of release us and we would just be, wild animals running around being crazy. So that it's always been a big thing for me. My dad used to do a lot of hunting and fishing trips up to Alaska. So that left a real impression on me as well, seeing him come home from those every year. And so when I spent a lot of time on public land, kind of in my 20s. And when I met my wife, she didn't really have that background. So for her, like even going in a tent was sort of a new experience. So we actually bought a little travel trailer and started kind of easing her into that way. And she loved it. And about the time we decided to have kids, I made I had an idea that I ran past her and I said, hey, look, public land access and being out in nature is a really, really important part of my life. And I got into hunting more in my 20s and 30s, but at the time I was also really into fishing and just being outside. And so I said, look, I think we should make the commitment if we're going to have kids that we should spend a minimum of 30 days a year sleeping on public land. And, and like, let's see if we can do it. And she said, okay. And so we started that in 2011 with the birth of our first daughter. And we have not broken that record. So we have not, we've had a perfect record. We've done it every year. And sometimes that means a lot of short trips. We've been fortunate that I think 4 times over the last 5 or 6 years. The COVID thing was challenging in a lot of ways, but one thing that was great was all of a sudden everybody's working remote and I bought a Starlink and now I can just work from anywhere. And I'm like, this is amazing. So post COVID, we've had several runs where we spent, 30 plus days in a row on public land. And I would work for, half a day and then go take the kids and we'd go find a lake and go fishing or, go on a hike or, stuff like that. So it's been a pretty big part of my life, pretty much all the way through. The marketing thing is interesting because all the years I was one of the lucky individuals that I always knew what I wanted to do, like from the time I was a little kid. I just wanted to be a journalist. I was obsessed with magazines when I was a kid. You remember like we'd sell those like magazine subscriptions. Well, I was like my own best customer and I got everything from like back in the old days, like Peterson's, and like all these different magazines and I would get them all and I'd read them all. And I knew all the bylines, which I think for a kid that was weird to like know the bylines of all these like writers. And I thought it was really cool. And I really wanted to do that. And then I was fortunate that I submitted some photos and some writing I had done to a couple of magazines in high school. And a couple of editors wrote back and they basically said, hey, look, we're not actually going to like this. That's not how this works. Like, we're not just going to like take your stuff and run it, but we respect that you did it. And, we'd love to sort of talk to you about more if you're interested. And so at the time I was growing up in Southern California. And so I was fortunate that Peterson Publishing was in LA. And so a couple of these sort of junior editors who I think at the time were like in their like late 20s, but to me as like a high school student, these were like adults, they sort of took pity on me and they said, hey, like if you come down to our office, we'll take you out to lunch. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's cool. I'd never driven that far before. I was like 16 or 17. So I drove down, went to the Peterson Publishing building, met these two guys. They took me out to like a hamburger place and they're like, all right, ask your questions. I'm like, I want to do what you do. How do you do this? And they're like, this is a terrible job. Don't do it. They're like, you need to get a degree. You need to get a portfolio. You need to write a bunch of stuff. You need to submit it anywhere that'll take it. Hopefully you're going to get published. Build a little portfolio. You'll eventually, if you keep grinding, you'll probably be able to get a gig. And then if you're lucky enough to get the gig, you're going to work your butt off. And there's no like office hours. You're going to be working weird hours, nights, weekends, going to events. You may or may not have any kind of benefits. You're not going to make it hardly any money. And there's no job security. And I'm like, that sounds great. Let's
Yeah.
do it. And I think they were like, wait, what? And I'm like, oh yeah, that sounds great. I'm like, I'm going to be Hunter S. Thompson. So that was the goal. I actually worked my way through college, writing for a bunch of different magazines, including a bunch of stuff I wasn't interested in. I wrote for a bodybuilding magazine. I wrote for a tech magazine. These were not subjects I was particularly interested in, but they paid me to write. So I'm like, look, I can learn about creatine. Sure. Whatever. So I did that, and I was fortunate that I got a journalism degree from Cal State, and was fortunate to have graduated with a job offer from Peterson Publishing on the table. So I thought I hit the lottery, and I started my job. Everything was cool. All of a sudden, I'm like riding up the elevator in the Peterson building, and I'm like, I did it. Like I'm 22, and like I've already accomplished my life goal. And within a month of me starting that job, Mr. Peterson sold the company to a British like private equity group. They then flipped the thing. I think I got flipped 3 times in the 3 years I worked there. And every flip, the job got harder and the environment got more challenging. And then the internet happened. And I'll never forget for the rest of my life being in this kind of conference room with all the editors and then some of the higher ups, like the publisher types. And this was about the time that we started seeing blogs, and like Jason Calacanis, who started Weblogs Inc. and eventually sold it to AOL. And now he's like a big tech billionaire guy. But at the time, like he had started these things, and we're like, hey, have you guys heard of these like blogs? They can publish same day. And like the editors can publish themselves, and they don't need like a tech guy who knows how to code. What are we going to do? And I'll never forget for the rest of my life, because it was such a life lesson. These guys that were at the time, I think all in their probably their 50s and 60s, they looked at us and they're like, we're not going to do anything. The internet's a fad. Like if we'll put up an informational website on a 90-day lag, but we're not going to like compete with that because it'll cannibalize our audience. And we're like, but no, because if these guys can publish content, they can go to a SHOT Show, get content about something new, and this can be up the same day, or the reader has to wait 90 days to hear it from us. They're not going to wait. And I was so disheartened by that conversation. I'm like, I've got to learn how to work the internet. So I left that job. I ended up working for a .com for about 2 years. Learned a lot about digital publishing. But the pace was so intense, and that was during the whole .com bubble thing, where I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is not also like a healthy way to live. Like I'm, working like, 80 hours a week for minimal pay. So I actually kind of quit that job out of frustration with no plan at the exact moment that I had just bought my first house. So now I've got a mortgage. I couldn't afford the house. So I had like 3 roommates, but still had a mortgage and no job. And I'm like, this adult thing is hard. And a buddy worked for a small marketing and PR agency. And he said, hey, look, like we're looking for someone who can write. And so like, until you figure your next journalism job, come work for us. And, you can pay your bills until you figure your next step. I'm like, okay. And I went there, and the rest was sort of history. I loved it. I was able to sort of still be creative. I could still create things. I could still talk to people. I like learning about how stuff is made. I like learning about audiences. I like talking to enthusiasts of any kind. I got to do all those things. And I also had a stable job with a pretty good paycheck. And so I was there a couple of years. I went to a bigger agency where I became an account director. I was there a couple of years. And then kind of Web 2 happened, and social media and content creation. And all of a sudden everybody had a voice. And I wrote a business plan on how to pivot the agency I worked at. I said, hey, I think we can apply this to our business model. And the founder of that agency said, no, again, there's a pattern here. The social media thing's a fad. I'm going like, okay. So I kind of out of frustration kind of came home, and now my now wife, who I had met earlier in this story, had a good corporate job. And she said, look, I can pay the bills. I've got health insurance. Why don't you test that business plan out that you wrote? See if it works. And if it works, cool. If it doesn't, you can always go get another job. So I quit. I started my first agency, Kahn Media, which we still run, which focuses more on transportation and automotive and luxury brands. Uh, that was about 18 years ago. And then fast forward a few years, and I continued to do all the outdoor rec stuff as my hobby. And that's when we acquired and sort of relaunched Tread, which is our outdoor rec agency. And then we actually just launched the third agency this year, which is focused more on kind of local and regional small businesses. So I've become kind of addicted, I guess, to starting agencies, but that's how I got into this, the whole thing.
Well, that's a very unique story. I think you have a lot of background that a lot of POMA members will have in the sense of like aspiring to be a journalist and then realizing maybe it's not all it's cracked up to be. Well, it's fun. It doesn't always pay the bills as much as we want. So what I don't want you to give everything away about your keynote, but what would you say is kind of the big idea or the takeaway that you're going to want POMA members to leave with?
So, I think we are at a really, really fascinating time in terms of being involved in content and the media. I think there's a tremendous, and look, anytime there's a huge societal pivot, I think there's winners and losers. And I think there's a huge amount of opportunity. And if you're willing to sort of lean into that opportunity, it can be tremendously beneficial. And if you're going to sort of ostrich, you're going to, I mean, look, like rewind the clock to the 100 years ago, the late 19 teens, early 1920s, all of a sudden automobiles went from being a very expensive toy for rich people to suddenly mass production means pretty much any person with a job can theoretically afford to go buy a car. Now, would you do that versus owning a horse? Yeah, it actually makes more sense to do that. So if you're in the saddle business, you might want to consider sort of a slight tweak to your business model, or you're going to sell a lot fewer saddles, But if you can figure out how to pivot that and sell something that relates to this new model, you're going to do okay. I think we're in a similar sort of pivot right now, and AI is part of it. A lot of brands suddenly having, a lot of the gatekeeping that prevented brands from direct to consumer sales have dissolved. Where, I mean, even in my career over the last 25 or so years, at the beginning of this, there was no direct to consumer sales. All the brands in our industry had to sell through multi-step distribution, and not just because of regulatory stuff. We're not just talking about like firearms where you have to go through an FFL, but even optics, apparel, whatever. Mm-hmm. Like it just, the economics didn't make sense. These manufacturing companies didn't want to have a bunch of customer service operators and a bunch of phone salespeople and some guy in the back who's packing and shipping UPS boxes of individual products to individual. None of it made sense. Now, all of a sudden, you've got things like Shopify and all these other, e-com tools that make it really easy. Selling has become a lot easier. You can have social selling. You can have, things like, I mean, I hate to say it, but like TikTok Shop is super simple and really effective. Google Shopping, really easy. And now with AI, same thing. You can code a whole website in 20 minutes, and it's pretty straightforward. So all of that, I think, is opportunity, but it's also threat. Right. So how do we, as either the brands that are involved in our industry or as the storytellers in our, or, in the POMA organization, in our industry, how do we sort of manage that change? And how do we do it in a way that we're sort of protecting ourselves and we're finding sort of a new flight path? And we're also sort of building a potentially lucrative future. And I think, some POMA members that I've met at past conferences have already figured that out. I mean, I know several journalists that are now basically influencers, right? They're still writing content. They're still writing for publications, maybe their own publication, maybe they're contributing to a larger publication. They're also recording a lot of content. They're also putting a lot of reviews on sites. filming themselves and putting them up, as vertical format video and talking about their thoughts on different issues. They're reviewing gear. There is a lot of opportunity for that. And I think if you can lean into that, you're not only going to help sort of make yourself a little more bulletproof when it comes to this sort of very dynamic economy, you're also going to make yourself an authority. And maybe that byline that was sort of easy to ignore in an old print magazine, it's a lot harder to ignore if you have 50, 100, 150,000 followers on Instagram who subscribe to your channel because they want to hear your thoughts on the latest optic or the latest rod, right? Now suddenly, can you still sell your articles? You absolutely can. But now you're a personality. Now that also means a lot more work, right? Because I mean, not everybody wants to be on camera. Not everybody wants to be a talking head. And in my experience, I wanted to be a writer because I like to write. I don't like being on camera. Um, this is sort of the world we have to navigate.
So, do you think AI is going to level the playing field, or do you think it's going to widen the gap between good and great marketers?
I have my take on AI has been very dynamic over the last couple of years. In total disclosure, and as somebody who I take a lot of pride in, I'm sort of the Dr. Frankenstein of marketing in terms of like I'm always experimenting on myself first.
Mhm.
We're never going to go to a client and introduce a product or service that we haven't already tested on ourselves. Um, and I'm very candid that we were at a company all hands meeting, I think 3 or 4 years ago, and our creative director at the time, and this was early days of ChatGPT. I think it was ChatGPT 1. And he came to us and said, "Hey, what are we going to do about this?" And I looked at him like, "This is not even." I mean, I was the old guy in all my stories. The internet's not a real thing. Social media is not a real thing. I literally said, "I'm like, I don't think that's really relevant at this point because it's not good enough to be worrisome." And at the time, that was true. I mean, at the time, yeah, there were some early LLMs, but they were pretty clunky. But I was the one that was lacking vision. And thankfully, I sort of snapped out of it and went, oh, no, wait, this thing is accelerating at an incredible rate. We need to be aware of it. Um, and today, I'm very deep into all the major LLM platforms. We actually have an AI discovery service through our parent company that's been quite successful and is actually kind of mostly PR. I mean, that's the dirty secret not everyone wants to talk about is when you look at a Venn diagram of like traditional SEO that we're all used to as content creators, right? And then like you look at like AI discovery or GEO, or there's like a bunch of different names for it, but it's all the same thing, right? The shaded area in the middle is about 75%. It's high authority content, it's high authority backlinks, it's trusted sources. This is all basically coming from journalists and PR. So there's, I think, a huge amount of opportunity for the marketers when it comes to AI. I think the challenges are certainly there's a number of them, right? One is certainly IP, right? If you write a piece of content, that's your voice, it's your opinion, it's your years of experience that have informed you to write that piece, whether it's a review of an event or a product or just a news article or whatever it is, you probably don't want that necessarily being scraped and rolled into the sort of univoice on an LLM. That's happening, unfortunately, whether we like it or not. So that is one thing that I think our journalists and creators are going to have to sort of navigate. On the flip side, the velocity at which you can process and absorb data is now so fast that I heard a guy describe, basically the different LLMs in the business environment as an Iron Man suit for the American worker. And I kind of love that because that's sort of how I use it. Right. And I'll say like, look, like there are certain things I'm still going to write. I wrote a book that I released about a year ago. I wrote that book myself. It took me like 3 years and it was a pain in the butt, but I'm proud of it. I'm glad I did it. I write a lot of blog articles. I write those myself. Now I use AI to copy edit them, and it's a heck of a lot faster than, using Grammarly and having to go through and figure all that stuff out. Um, but like that whole thing has become much more efficient. Now there's some tasks I don't want to do. And if I can use AI to sort of for process improvement, sure, I'm going to do that. Like when we're building out a proposal for a potential client and they want a pricing spreadsheet, I hate Excel. If I can take a couple of past proposals that are pretty similar and I can feed those in and say, here's the parameters of this project and here's what the sort of budget needs to look like. Can you build me a budget in Excel? And it can do it in 30 seconds or less. And I don't have to spend 5 hours staring at my monitor and I can go outside. Heck yeah, let's do it. So I think that where this is all going to go, whether we like it or not, unfortunately, is the adoption rate is so high. And especially like I even, my in-laws live on our property with us and they're in their 70s. And the fact that like my father-in-law has a tremor, so it's hard for him to type, even on, especially on a phone. But the fact that he can hit the microphone button on Gemini, ask it a question, and it answers his question, and he can sort of move on with his day, that is a game changer for him.
Mhm.
So I think society is going to adopt this whether we like it or not. So that's where I think we're going to have to really lean into authentic voices. Where if you're someone like I'll give an example, like Rochelle Shrude, a gear junkie. I'm a fan of hers. I read all of her stuff. She's been to a couple of our experiential events. She is very candid about who and what she is on her social media channel. And sometimes she's talking about her personal life, and sometimes she's talking about gear she's reviewing. Sometimes she's talking about what it's like to be a female journalist in a sort of male dominated world when it comes to the hunt and 2A stuff. I love that. There's no replacing that with AI. I think people are going to, they are they're a fan of that or they're not. And if they are, they're going to be more of a fan because it's not vanilla ice cream.
Yeah.
I think there's a time and a place for vanilla ice cream. And that's like, hey, Gemini or ChatGPT, what size tippet do I need for this particular setup? And maybe it's going to make a recommendation. And I'm standing at the checkout counter at a fly shop. And if it gives me that information in 10 seconds and I can make a purchase call in the day, great. Thanks. Done. But if I want to be entertained, if I want to go deep, I want to know who's providing that content. And I'm going to follow people that I actually respect and who align with my sort of views or values.
Yeah, we do talk a lot about authenticity. Do you think, especially with AI, that audiences are getting better at spotting inauthentic content?
Absolutely. Yeah, I do. I mean, like if I see the word masterclass in anything anymore, I'm like, that's AI.
Yeah.
So and what's fascinating to me is I have of an 11-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 15-year-old. And especially the younger two, they're digital natives. And we've been very intentional raising my kids to not, because of what I do for a living, I'm sort of like my kids don't have social media accounts. They're not allowed to get phones until 8th grade, and only then because of like sports and pickup and stuff
Yeah.
like that. I mean, it is helpful for logistics. But even though we've kept them fairly isolated from the sort of sketchier parts of, internet exposure and stuff like that, they are way better at spotting fake stuff than I am. Like I was on Instagram like a week or two ago and somebody sent me a clip and it was a fishing clip and it was this guy pulled in this like monster bass. I'm like, wow, look at this. And my son's like, that's fake. And I'm like, no, it's not. Look at this. Like this is on like a regular fishing. And he's like, no, that's definitely fake. And he was right. It was an AI generated video. And I'm like, how did you know? And he's like, I don't know. I could just tell. So I do think that it kind of there is sort of the digital native perspective, which is they are just intrinsically better at it.
Mhm.
And I think that again, that authenticity thing is look. I mean, there's always going to be a velocity component where if you want information quickly, people I think are going to inevitably always go with. I mean, that's why Amazon has done what Amazon has done, right? There are days where I want to go to a, outdoor rec shop and try on every pair of boots because I really want to get boots that are going to be comfortable. And then I want to put, a couple thousand miles on over the next couple of years. I'm going to do that in person. If I need to buy like a new cable for my computer and I live 30 minutes from the nearest office supply store, I'm just going to go on Amazon. I'm going to buy whatever Amazon recommends and it's going to show up on my porch tomorrow. I'm okay with that trade-off. And for me as a consumer, I'm going to make that decision of where do I really care about that real experience and where do I just want the velocity and sort of the frictionless purchase experience. So I think with information, it's the same thing. I think there's going to be moments where people are going to turn to the AI stuff because it's easy. And then I think there's going to be moments where they're like, no, I want to hear what someone actually has to say.
So for somebody who feels behind on AI, because I think our POMA members, some are definitely all on top of it and just use ChatGPT and others very well, but other group of our members just aren't used to using AI because we do strive to be authentic communicators, and that's what really sets people apart. But for somebody who feels behind on AI, what would you say is one of the most practical uses that they can do to start today to take advantage of it?
Well, I'll give you two perspectives, the perspective of the marketer and the perspective of the journalist or storyteller. From the perspective of the storyteller, one of the things that I just love using AI for, and I do this almost daily, is it is phenomenal for compiling huge amounts of information into a digestible format quickly. So like, for example, and I have my own kind of a leadership podcast called OTSS, which stands for Only the Strong Survive. And we had this guest I was really excited to talk to, who was a referral from actually one of my team members. And this guy, normally we talk to people kind of from the industry, but this guy started a nonprofit that it helps people that are neurodivergent, mostly on the spectrum, with job training and job placement
Wow.
in kind of hands-on jobs. And I have a couple family members that kind of are in that sort of situation. So for me, this was like a personal thing. I wanted to do a good job interviewing this guy. I was interested in him. I had his CV, I had his resume. That wasn't the issue. But I also didn't want to misspeak. I didn't want to sort of tell his story in a way that didn't honor his journey and also the audience that he serves, right? I didn't want to say the wrong thing. So I sort of took all the information I compiled and I dumped it all into Gemini, and I said, okay, here's this person that I'm speaking to, and this is what I want to focus the interview on, and here's all this sort of research that I found and all the papers that he's published, and here's all these articles about his organization. Can you help me compile this into sort of a bullet pointed list of here's the things I probably should focus on, and here are the things I should avoid saying and the way I shouldn't say them. Now, could I have done that by myself? Absolutely. Would it have taken me half a day? Yes. In this case, it took me 10 minutes. So to me, that's the Iron Man suit, right? Like that's just like my little helper sitting next to me saying, okay, here's the best way to navigate that. Could I have gone on and said, I've never met this person, I don't know anything about him, I'm going to interview him, please give me my interview question list? Yes, I could have. Would that have been the most authentic way to approach that conversation? No. I want to be involved in that process. So to me, it's a really good information gathering tool. But I also want to sort of walk that line where I'm staying authentic to both myself and to my audience. On the marketing side of things, I think what you don't want is slop.
Mhm.
And all the GPT or all the LLM tools, whether it's Claude, Gemini, Grok, ChatGPT, all of them, Perplexity, they all have positives and negatives. Like I actually like Grok for ideation when it comes to image generation. Like we have a video department. And if we, in the old days, we have some clients that really want to see a storyboard every time we're about to do a shoot. We used to hand illustrate every storyboard.
Yeah.
And I have a great illustrator on my team who's super talented, but it would take him a week. It'd be like
Hmm.
40 or 50 hours of work. And then we'd submit a storyboard that the client would spend literally like 5 minutes looking at it. And they'd like, you send it to them and if I email back 5 minutes later, either like approved or no, I don't like images 10 and 15, can you change those? To spend 40 hours on something that they're going to look at for 5 minutes and it's never going to be public facing is not super efficient.
Hmm.
If we can go in and use an AI tool, either Adobe AI or Grok or whatever, to sort of illustrate this thing. And again, we're not publishing this content, right? This is all ideation based. And we can do that in half an hour or an hour instead of a week. To me, that's a huge, huge game changer. That's such a great efficiency tool. Would I want to use AI to generate images we're going to put in ads that are consumer facing? No. It's inauthentic. It's easy to spot. And it's also generally not on brand. And also, especially if you're publishing content on any of the social channels, they're now, I mean, they don't publish the algorithm, but it's now becoming pretty clear that they're repressing AI content. They want authentic voices, right?
Hmm.
So to me, what I would sort of use it as an accelerant. Anything you can do for efficiency's sake, do it. Are you going to use it to actually generate your content? I wouldn't, because that's going to take away the one thing that's uniquely you, and that's your authentic voice.
So kind of pivoting a little bit, about thinking about like being authentic in this outdoor space that we all are in the hook and bullet community. Where do you see the outdoor media industry going in the next like 3 to 5 years?
That's a great question. It's a hard one to answer. I think one of the things I love about being in the outdoor rec industry is the majority of the people that I've met, both as a consumer and as a marketer, really they would rather be outside than almost anything else. Like we're all trying to avoid sitting in a cubicle on a computer, right? Like that's the whole point of this entire exercise. And whether you're
Mhm.
into big game hunting or fly fishing or just going on kind of long hikes or whatever it is that you're interested in, it's you're trying to avoid the one thing that this is sort of all leading to, which is sort of becoming this like weird human hybrid machine thing that just cranks out generic content all day. So I think where I see things happening is I see sort of a divergent path appearing where in some cases, I think we are just, I mean, one of the things I've also found about people in the hook and bullet market, and this definitely applies to me personally, is we really like researching and buying gear.
Mhm.
And like, I went through a phase at one point where I was like really into doing my own kind of rifle work. And it got ridiculous. Or I was like, I set up this bench with every tool you can imagine. And I got to the point where I was building rifles just to build rifles. And I ended up filling my safe. And I'm like, okay. And at some point you have that moment where you realize like, oh, this is problematic. Like, okay, I'm spending too much money. This is not necessary. I'm going to sell like half my stuff and just keep the ones I really like. I think for people, especially consumers that are in that phase, I do think there is some value to AI as a research tool. If you're trying to solve a problem, I mean, this is a little off topic, but not totally off topic. We live on a farm, and we have goats that were pregnant. They were due this past week. We had had a farm vet come out to try and coach us through what was going to happen. But the guy was like a cranky old jerk and he wasn't very nice. And he made my wife and I feel terrible because we're like, what do we do in this case? What do we do in this case? And he's like, you just figure it out. And I'm like, not helpful, dude.
No.
Thank you. So all of a sudden it's midnight and we're in a barn stall and the goat's screaming and there's a breech baby. And my wife and I are like, oh my God, like, this, and our kids are in the stall. And I'm like, if this thing dies, this is going to be like really horrible for everybody. I literally had my phone out anyway because I was like taking pictures because I'm like, this is crazy. And I literally just fired up Gemini and put it on like the voice to talk mode. And I'm like, here's what's going on. I explained the situation in detail. And I'm like, what do we do? And it gave me a super detailed answer. And we went in there and did it. And the baby's fine and everything's good. I don't know if that would have happened without AI.
Yeah. Yes.
Like a Google search, and then what? You're going to find a bunch of YouTube videos and
Yeah.
hopefully find the right like. So I do think as a research tool, especially even for like product research, I think it's super effective. But I also I think the consumer knows that, and the consumer is going to continue to lean into that. And when it comes to like consumer research and selling of products, I do think that we just have to sort of accept the fact that this is a high velocity, low friction situation, and people like that, and we're going to have to lean into it. On the flip side, I think people are also starving for things that are real storytelling, authentic content. Like an example that I love is, um, you know, uh, I don't know if you've seen the magazine Wild Sam or what
Mhm.
they're doing, or like Mountain Gazette is another one where like I subscribe to both of those. They're printed on like thick stock, high quality paper, beautiful photography, great writing. And at the end of the day, I've spent most of my days either on Zoom calls or on client calls or in front of a computer. I don't like it. That's the reality of my life. It is what it is. At the end of the day, when I'm trying to unwind for a few minutes before bed, I do not want to be looking at a screen.
Yeah.
So for me, these sort of smaller independent publisher, pieces of media, and that could be on the web too. It doesn't necessarily have to be print, but at least for me, at the end of the day, I'm trying to avoid blue light. I'm trying to not be on my phone. If I can pick up something real, and be entertained by beautiful, authentic writing. Look at really cool pictures. I'm holding it in my hand. It's not some screen glowing in my eyes.
Yeah.
To me, that's an experience that I don't want to live without. And so I do think there's room for both. And same thing with people who like Bethany, who's probably going to come to this and like she does a great job with her content on Instagram, right? I watch a lot of her stuff. I watch her videos. I like that she's got, her kids with her sometimes, I like her whole story. Sometimes I don't want to go on YouTube or Instagram to see a bunch of like politics seems like it's everywhere these days. I don't want to get hammered with more politics stuff. If I can see someone do a video where they're reviewing an over under or something, great. I want to watch that. I want to be entertained and then I want to move on with my life. And she's real and it's not AI and no one's selling me anything. They're just telling me a story. So I think that getting back to like core principles of what we all do for a living is actually really important. At the end of the day, if you can tell a great story and if you can do it in an authentic way, there's a double win there. First of all, you're going to build an audience. It might take time, but you will build one. And you will eventually be able to sort of monetize that one way or another, either by building your own channel or getting hired to work for an existing publisher or both. The LLMs are also going to index that content. And eventually you're going to get cited as a source and as a high authority source. And then you kind of get the double win, where not only are you going to continue to be able to grow your own channels, but what I'm seeing happen more and more, especially on ChatGPT and Gemini, is now in search, it's citing the sources with the links. And we're even having that happen on the tread side, where now we're getting leads from new clients every week or so that are coming in saying, hey, I found you through AI, and here's the product or service we're launching, and can you help? And I think it's because we publish a lot of blog content. So, I do think there's a longer tail to this thing that we just don't know exactly what it looks like yet, but it's starting to look like we will end up getting that sort of attention in the attention economy that we wanted in the first place.
So, going off that, what is one marketing trend that you really love right now, and what's one that you would say is maybe overrated?
Well, I'm going to get old school on you.
Mhm.
And a marketing trend that I love right now, and it's actually really, I think, specific to the 2A market, is I, for a while, sort of abandoned email marketing. I got tired of it. It felt old school.
Mhm.
Um, but I think because, especially firearms manufacturers, but even, you know, suppressor manufacturers and, anything regulated, right? Um, they're operating in such a restricted environment, right? Like we have to be very careful what words and language we use on social. We have to be careful what images we use on social. Over the years, obviously people have tried to sort of launch their own social platforms. That never works. When you have a town square and everyone's in the town square, you got to operate in that town square. You're not going to start your own town square 20 miles away. It doesn't work. So we have to sort of tiptoe around all this stuff. And you also that's rented land, right? You don't own the platform. You don't own Instagram, even X, which is better than it used to be. You don't own that, and there's a lot of weird stuff going on there. So, when you have earned, owned, and paid media, it's those owned channels that become super critical in a regulated space. And that's your blog, that's your email list, and that's kind of it, right? And like there's maybe like SMS or something. Um, there are some brands that are just doing a great job. And I think technology has made first party data and list segmentation a lot easier than it used to be. They used to be like an Excel thing that would take like dedicated employees, like huge amounts of work to do. Now, I think, especially with direct to consumer sales, as companies are selling product, they can segment the customers into lists of what they're interested in and what their purchase history shows, or even geography where they live.
Mhm.
And then you can actually communicate with people much easier than you used to be. And again, this is another opportunity for storytellers, right? Where, if you can send out an email to if you've got a subset of your customer base that really are just focused on whitetail hunting, and you can send out a newsletter just to those folks, and it's all whitetail content, whether it's, stories that relate to them, product that relates to them. If you can entertain and engage them, the interaction rate, I mean, we're seeing on some of these email programs we're running, we're seeing click-through rates in the 30-40% range, which is double what we considered a win 5 years ago. We're
Mhm.
seeing click-through rates that are super high, 5-6%. Now that D2C sales has gotten a lot easier, we're seeing conversion numbers that are way high. So, something it's cool that it's sort of a back to basics with the email thing. now that first party data has gotten a lot easier in terms of both collecting it and sort of sorting it and collating it, as long as you're just not doing like a spray and pray, right? Like don't buy
Yeah.
a list. That's bad. Don't take your list and just shotgun a bunch of stuff out to everybody, assuming everyone's the same. They're not. But if you can either entertain people or if you can help people solve problems in a way that feels really targeted to them. And I mean, a perfect example that's non-regulated is like I'm wearing a Poncho shirt right now. Poncho does a great job with email marketing,
Yeah.
and like
Everybody's wearing a poncho shirt right now. They're
everyone,
doing a
right?
great job.
They do a great job, and I got sucked into their little vortex. And I don't work with them. I don't know those guys, but like I think I bought a couple of shirts from them a year or two ago, and now they're just hitting me with it's quick, digestible little newsletters. There's occasionally a story or a video. Sometimes it's like a deal where they're like, hey, spend $200 and we'll give you $100 worth of product for free. And it's not some big long scroll. It's very visual. It's very on brand. They're doing a great job, and much to my wife's chagrin, I just keep spending money with them. So I'm really liking that, and I think if you can really lean into sort of creativity and segmentation, uh, as old school as it is, email is actually having kind of a renaissance right now, especially in regulated markets. Something I don't like is I'm really burning out on sort of the vanilla ice cream we were talking about earlier. I'm kind of burning out on a lot of the social platforms in general because I'm seeing just so much rinse and repeat where it's like people that are like all the posts are starting to look the same, content starting to look the same, copy sort of looking the same, and like the AI thing, yes, does it increase efficiency? It does. But again, like we've been talking about this whole conversation, if you get away from your brand values and that authentic voice, I think a lot of people seem to think there's this like, you know, genius robot brain somewhere that's like a replacement for a human. It's software.
Mhm.
And that same software that's running on a server is the back end of every prompt and every response every one of us is getting that's using that platform. So it doesn't, so if you've got someone from three different competing brands that are all in the same market and they're all giving it the same prompt, asking for the same social media calendar, it's generating the same basic answer to all three. And then all of a sudden now you've got three competing brands that are all generating pretty much the same stuff across all the different social platforms. And now it's all just vanilla. And to me, that's not good for anybody. So where I think we need to kind of be hyper aware is like, look, and actually a brand that's not in our space that I think does a really good job framing this is Liquid Death,
Yeah.
the water company. And it's interesting because their founder was a marketing agency guy. And he went on a podcast called Tetragrammaton. That's a pretty interesting. Rick Rubin, who's like a music producer who produced the Beastie Boys and Red Hot Chili Peppers and stuff, is kind of an interesting dude. And he has this podcast, and he had the founder of Liquid Death on. And that guy said that when the AI thing took away all the friction in marketing, they did the opposite. And they said, okay, instead of posting content once a day, we're going to post content once a week or even once a month. And we're only going to post it when it's wild and crazy and the bar is so high that people have to pay attention, even if they're outraged. And if you actually look at any of their social channels, you'll see that that actually is true. They don't post very often, but when they do, it's crazy. It's crazy content. And it's like totally insane. And it gets super high engagement and people remember that and they share it. And I think what the new currency or the new metric for success to me, especially on social, is not likes. It's not reach or engagement to me, and it's one that's basically impossible to track. It's the interaction that's happening in DMs
Mm,
and
yeah.
it's people's camera roll. If you see a piece of content that's so good, you either share it in your group chat with your friends or you screenshot it because you
Yeah.
want to save it. To me, that is the highest sort of conversion you can get because that's a person that they so engaged or enjoyed your piece of content that they're like, I either have to save this for later so I can look at it again, or I'm sending it to all my friends.
Mhm.
And that's not going to happen through a bunch of AI slop. That's going to happen through a lot of time and intent and creativity.
So, kind of wrapping this up, if you could leave our POMA members with one mindset shift heading into the future of media and marketing, what would that be?
I would say that whether you're a marketer trying to sell product to a consumer, or you're a journalist trying to share your story or your content with a reader or an audience, the mindset shift that needs to happen, and we'll actually probably talk about this at my talk, is that I think for many decades the ecosystem that we all, and we're on different sides of the table, but it's the same table, right?
Mhm.
The ecosystem we all operated in was pretty much unchanged for about 50 years. And that was the mindset was the center of the solar system is a brand, right? Or a product. And the thing that's orbiting around that brand or that product, in the solar system, would be kind of all these different channels, right? So earned media, owned media, paid media, whether you're, so if you're, whatever, if you're Ruger and you're a brand manager at Ruger or you're Yeti or whatever, pick any brand, or you're a publisher of your own magazine, doesn't matter. The sun, the center, so the center of your solar system is your brand, and all these other things are supposed to sort of channel audience traffic, whatever word you want to use, into the center of your solar system. And there's been this, and Copernicus was the one who kind of figured out. He didn't invent the telescope; someone else invented the telescope. He just did the math, and he's the one who figured out, because at that point, and up until Copernicus, he thought that that the Earth was the center of the solar system, and that the sun and the moon and everything orbited around the Earth. And he's the one who did the math and figured out, like, oh, wait, no, that's not right, because we have seasons and the time of day changes. And it turns out the sun is the center of the solar system, and we're just one of the things orbiting around it. And that was the Copernican shift in astronomy, right? And I think we're going through that shift right now in terms of storytelling and marketing and journalism, where the brand or the product or the publication is no longer the center of the solar system. The individual consumer is. And
Mhm.
so everything we do needs to go to them. We cannot expect these other mediums to bring them to us. So how do you reach each individual consumer? Well, the first thing you have to do is understand who they are. So if you're a writer, and maybe you are a regional writer that covers fishing in the upper Great Lakes, or maybe you're the editor in chief of one of the biggest, firearm publications in the world. Doesn't matter. In both cases, this mindset applies. Who is your audience? Where do they live? What's their life look like? What are they looking for? And then how do you connect with that person? And same thing on the marketing side. I think if you're a brand manager or a CEO or whatever it is at a company and you make a product, I don't think anybody at our conference is selling toothpaste, right? These are all relatively specialized products that apply to relatively specialized audiences and markets. So who is your customer? And there's probably a bunch of them, right? It's not just one size fits all. You probably have a bunch of avatars of a bunch of different customers and consumers. Who are they? Where do they live? What's their life look like? What are their needs? What are their desires? What are they trying to accomplish? And where do they spend their time? And then you need to connect that with them through the avenues that they've already chosen. So if you've got a product that appeals to a younger audience, and it's a more diverse audience, maybe more of a kind of a city dwelling audience, they're probably on TikTok. If your brand isn't on TikTok, you are missing a huge opportunity. So you may not like TikTok, but you probably need to go there.
Yeah.
On the flip side, like, we can be honest, like, I like to fly fish. Fly fishing is a not particularly popular sport with, Gen Alpha urban city dwellers, right? So who is our audience? We can build the avatar of who that audience is. And there's probably a couple different subsets, and where do they live and what are they interested in and where are they spending their time? And okay, how do we engage in storytelling as a strategy with those different groups where they live and on the platforms that they like and in the sort of packaging that they appreciate. So maybe it's a video, maybe it's a magazine article, maybe it's a newsletter. And so I think if we can see each individual consumer, or at least consumer group, as the center of their own little solar system, it's gotten a lot easier to tailor that message to them, and you're going to have a lot more sort of effectiveness.
Such a great way to say that, like to visually think about it as the solar system analogy. I really like that.
Thanks.
It has been great talking to you today. I have personally learned a lot of things, and my brain is kind of pausing and going, "Oh, that's a different way to think about stuff." And it really, I'm going to be sitting here pondering for a bit. But I am very excited to have you as our keynote at the POMA Summit. I think our members are going to get so much from you, both our writers, our media members, as well as our corporate partners from a marketing perspective. So. We are excited to have you in 2 months. It'll be here quickly. And I want to encourage all of our POMA members to be sure to register for the summit so you can hear more from Dan in May in Hugo, Minnesota. So thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Stephanie. I look forward to it.
All right.
Thanks for having me.